Turn thee Benvolio, and look upon thy death.
You're now asking, hey, this is a HEMA channel. Why am I looking at some 90s movie? Well, all forms of creative storytelling have fights in them and weapons, whether it be in epics such as The Lord of the Rings or in modern type theater, aka movies such as The Outlaw King or Last Samurai, but also classical theater productions such as the Shakespearean dramas. So let's take a look at one of the most prominent Shakespearean dramas, Romeo and Juliet. There's a modern approach to the topic by Baz Luhrmann from the 90s, with Claire Danes as Juliet and Leonardo DiCaprio as Romeo. The whole thing is set in modern times, replacing all the weapons we have in the drama with guns. For reference, I will use pictures from the movie for the characters. However, we don't look into the modern adaptation with guns, but into the original text. Let's look into the weapons used in the drama and let's analyze why they are used. As often common, Shakespeare sets the stage with a prologue before the actual play begins. The prologue is then followed by directions before any character has something to say. Interesting enough, we are introduced to Samson and Gregory, who are described to have swords and bucklers. So we have our first weapon. Given the play was published in 1597, let's take a look what these weapons might have looked like. When talking about swords in the Elizabethan era, we have to talk about the Mary Rose. The Mary Rose was a ship by the English Navy which entered service in 1511. She sank after a battle against the French in 1545 at the Strait of Solent. What is interesting is that after being raised in 1982, it proved to be a time capsule of the Tudor period. Swords, daggers, staff weapons, sailing equipment, and everyday stuff from the sailors was unearthed. Amongst them, there is a basket-hilted sword, which you can see here. It still reminds you of an arming sword. However, it already has a complex guard to protect the hand. Arms & Armor created a replica if you want to get a closer look at what it might have looked like. Referenced by the Mary Rose Museum is also a painting of a Sir William Palmer from 1540 wearing a similar sword. He is here depicted as a member of the Gentlemen Pensioners, a corps established by Henry VIII as his personal bodyguard, giving us a first hint about why the two characters could be equipped with such a weapon. By doing a quick research, I was led to the page of the Royal Armies where I could find a shield marked as a buckler made from wood and leather, dated to mid-16th century. This is a wonderful piece of art. Just look at the details on the inside. Interesting is that it seems to be strapped to the forearm of the wearer, whereas classical bucklers are held by a center grip. I could not find dimensions for this, but since your forearm is strapped, it is a rather large shield, being close to an Italian rotella. If you want to take a look at rotellas in action, I highly recommend the videos from the Schildwache Potsdam, which I will link up here. And as a little fun fact about this shield, finally, this little friend at the top is a lantern. How cool is that? Now, back to bucklers. In a classical sense and contemporary sources, a buckler is a rather small shield, which you can see here, my face, and is held by a center grip opposed to the forearm strap we have seen in this picture. The task of the buckler is supposed to protect your sword hand to not being hit, so they're relatively close to each other. I don't think I need to give you a detailed summary of the whole play, but let's keep it short. There's a family feud going on for generations between the Capulet and the Montagu family. Romeo Montague and Juliet Capulet fall in love with each other. Their families forbid it. They both die. A whole bunch of other people die, and that's all sad. The important question for us now: why would someone like Samson and Gregory wear sword and buckler as a combination of weapons? First of all, it marks your status. Gregory and Samson are both proud members of the Capulet family, so they need to show their wealth and power and nobility. So they are wearing swords and such type of weapons to show this on the street. The buckler now has a double function. Not only does it protect your sword hand when being in a actually sword fight, but also it can used as a weapon single-handedly when you don't want to draw your sword but just hit somebody in the face with. Another interesting point is the original of the term swashbuckling. According to Mike Lodes, a military historian and writer, sword and bucklers were attached to the hip in such a way that it would clank and rattle as they swaggered through the streets, so everybody could hear them coming. This is what Samson and Gregory do. They walk through the streets showing presents for the family and are prepared to pick a fight. Samson and Gregory indeed find adversaries, namely Abraham and Balthazar of the House of Montague. Just FYI, the movie switches their allegations to the houses. They do a kind of rap battle before they start fighting each other, I guess. Benvolio of the Montagues joins the fight, tries to split them and bring peace. Enter Tybalt, King of Cats, my favorite character in the whole drama. He gives the quote from the introduction and soon attacks Benvolio. The situation escalates and more people from both houses join the fight. Even citizens join the fray wearing clubs. There we have our next weapon. The club. The club, which includes cudgels, truncheons, and many more, is a simple but effective weapon for blunt force trauma injuries. Want to hurt somebody? Just hit them with a heavy stick. Sure, for military uses, there were versions with metal heads applied, such as the mace. So, why the clubs for the civilians? Such as the sword is a status for nobility, the mace is kind of a status for the common people who don't have access to a lot of money and therefore expensive weapons. So, pulling a leg of a table or a chair off of somewhere and just go and beat the whatever out of people, well, that will work. Roll for bludgeoning damage. A citizen shouts, "Clubs, bills, and partisans! Strike! Beat them down! Down with the Capulets! Down with the Montagues!" Clearly, the people of Verona are not very pleased with the daily fights between the two houses. They're not siding on one of the families, but they're trying to bring both of them down. And they're calling for the use of two other weapons, bills and partisans. Just like the halberd, the billhook is a weapon with which you can thrust, you can hook, and you can cut, depending on the situation. They were really present in England more than in other European countries, and even still so in the Elizabethan era. I here link you a video to some early billhook sparring. The partisan falls in the same category as the billhook, a polearm used mainly for thrusting, but also cutting, with protrusions on the sides of the spearhead used for parrying. Again, here is a video for you displaying the partisan. Note that both the bill and the partisan are mainly for military purposes, not so much in a civil context. The call to these weapons seems to activate now whether the city guards or people with military background. Introducing Lord Capulet, who immediately calls for a weapon without even knowing the context. Seems like fights like these are very common in the world of the play. So The longsword, in the Elizabethan era, a relic from the past. Being the weapon of choice in the 15th century, the development of arms and tactics, as well as time, put the longsword on the sidelines. Especially at the end of the 16th and the beginning of the 17th century, the rapier rose up to greatness. This does not mean that the longsword is obsolete. It still stands for a tradition, it stands for values, and it stands for strength. These are all things that Lord Capulet is. On the one hand, he's the head of a family, so a long-standing tradition, bold and full of valor. On the other hand, he is a relic from the past, clutching on this ancient grudge, and he cannot get let go of the past. So the longsword really fits him well. By the way, Lady Capulet reacts to his call for a weapon with a crutch, a quatch. Why call you for a sword? And I think that says it all. By the way, we have a source for 16th century English longsword, the so-called Liddell roll. Here you can see an interpretation of a technique taken from the source. So as a little break, imagine the situation. We have a whole bunch of Capulets and Montagues slashing and thrusting at each other. We have a lot of civilians running around with clubs trying to beat them down. We have military personnel, city guard or whatever, with bills and partisans trying to part all the people. And we have an old man joining the fray, swinging a longsword wildly. And this is only about 4 minutes into the play. So fast forward to Act 3, Scene 1. Romeo met Juliet. They fall in love with each other, and so on. In this scene, Tybalt, King of Cats, tries to confront Romeo because of his honor. He feels dishonored by Romeo and wants to duel him, but Romeo feels him now as a family member and tells him that and says, I can duel you. He tells him that he needs to love him because he's the cousin of Juliet, and so it's family. Tybalt enrages this even more and wants to duel him even harder. Romeo tries to keep him down again. But then Mercutio, a close friend to Romeo, steps in and takes Romeo's place and wants to duel Tybalt. He tries to remind Mercutio that the Prince of Verona forbade dueling and street fighting on the threat of torture. He tells him, gentle Mercutio, put thy rapier up. Ah yes, the rapier, a gentleman's weapon. To finish the scene, Tybalt stabs Mercutio. Mercutio dies. Romeo loses his shit, kills Tybalt, and is exiled for that. So finally, the rapier, a weapon for a more civilized age. Developed in the southern parts of Europe as a civil self-defense weapon in the 16th century, it quickly gained its status as the symbol of modernity and the gentleman status, and spread into the rest of Europe. The long blade and complicated hills proved to be very effective for civil defense, protecting the sword hand and keeping the enemy at bay, whilst also having a high advantage in reach. It combined the reach advantage of the prestigious longsword with the advantage in having your hand protected by a buckler. So a rapier is basically a very thin longsword with a buckler. You can see this clearly with the cup-hilt rapiers from the 1600s. Longsword, buckler. There are a lot of treatises dealing with rapier fencing. Foremost, Ridolfo Capoferro, just as before. Here you can see a rapier match, if you want to see rapiers in action. It is totally fitting into the Elizabethan era, since in 1570, Italian master Rocco Bonetti introduced the rapier to English society as a more efficient way to duel, compared to the old hack and slash. It is also a total match for people like Romeo, Tybalt, Benvolio, or Mercutio, being famous or infamous members of a high-class family. They're representing high nobility and wealth. So it's clear that they would use the gentleman weapon of their age. Also, they are very young still and are interested in the latest fashion, which also goes to weapons, and that is, for their age, the rapier. So I told you about the modern version of Romeo and Juliet with all sorts of guns. But ho! There's also a gun in the original play mentioned. We usually don't match Shakespearean plays with handguns, but they clearly existed. This can also be seen in the text. Romeo says, as if that name, shot from the deadly level of a gun, did murder her. Well, after killing Tybalt, Romeo is exiled, meaning that he will never see Juliet again. Juliet, on the other hand, is expected to marry a guy called Paris, and her parents approve. Romeo mourns that his name, being a Montague, left her heartbroken because he killed a dear family member of her, and she is not able to see him anymore. The information I found about this actually goes to a whole video by the channel That Shakespeare Life. The video dives deep into different handgun models from that time and how they work, attributing the wheel-lock gun to the one probably mentioned in Romeo and Juliet. To give you a little explanation to Romeo's sentence. When you are further away from your target, you need to aim up a little so your shot flies in an arc. If too far away, the shot loses velocity in such a way that it is not as dangerous anymore. But when you're close, you can point more directly at the target. The velocity of the shot and the shot range will make it deadly. So the deadly level is the angle at which a gun can be shot to certainly damage the target. We could see that weapons in Shakespearean dramas are given to characters to give them more background and also apply certain attributes to them. We have the old traditions and worldviews represented by Lord Capulet's longsword. We have the swashbuckling members of the house, still being nobility but looking for trouble in the streets. We have the young nobility wearing rapiers, being gentlemen and looking for the latest fashion, representing new values and worldviews. We have the common people being armed with clubs because they are not rich enough to afford a sword. And finally, we have military weapons, such as the billhook and the partisan, standing for law enforcement. In the end, Romeo and Juliet is not only a drama about a couple madly falling in love on a different level, it's also a drama about societal and generational clash. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and now you want to go to the theater and watch some Shakespearean play in case Romeo and Juliet, or go watch the Baz Luhrmann edition. Well, feel free to do so. I highly recommend those two. As always, thanks for watching. Please subscribe and leave your comments below this video. Ta-da! An honorable mention is the dagger. The dagger as a basic line of defense for everyday use. Everybody could take a knife and put it somewhere and take it along with you. The dagger is actually in the play an important piece. Romeo heard that Juliet is dead. Well, spoiler, she's not, but they think that Juliet is dead because she swallowed some poison that would make her look like dead, and then she will awaken 3 days later or something. So Romeo goes to where she's actually lying, can't bear the fact that she's dead, and stabs himself to death with the dagger. Juliet then wakes up, sees Romeo's corpse, and stabs herself with the same dagger, putting an end not only to their lives, but also to the feud. So, happy end for all others, I guess. So, it's actually an everyday practical tool, a knife which you carry around just like the snapping knives from Switzerland from today, but longer.